Hi artists, I'm going to take you through your part 2 of the watercolor exercises, which is this list on your handout of just some special effects and other ways to experiment that you might possibly use in the background of your portrait. So we'll just go through them really quickly in order now that we've got our footing with basic watercolor. So the aquarelle pencils, or watercolor pencil crayons, they're going to say aquarelle on them, and you can find them in that bin at the back. And they also come in sets if you're looking for a lot of detail. So the idea with these is if I create marks, any kind of mark making, I can press more lightly, harder. That line is going to stay to some degree. If I add simply water, those lines will remain, but they'll be softened and start to behave like watercolor. So the more that you conceal them, you can see here I'm really working them till they blend away. And maybe on this side, I don't touch it as much. That's how those might behave. And that could be beautiful in areas like clothing, fur textures, whiskers, hair, finer details with your aquarelle pencils. A wax crayon works really well to create a resist. And I'm using color here, but you could use a white crayon if you, let's say, wanted to protect a certain portion, maybe someone's eye, part of their teeth, any areas that are white that you're worried about keeping. But the wax that's in just your basic Crayola crayons resists any sort of water. They don't mix. And so even if I come in with a color, which I'll do here, this color is going to bead or pull away and the wax shows through. It doesn't matter how intense and saturated my color is here. You can kind of see that neat sort of splotchy effect happens and the crayon shows through. So just keep in mind that if you use the wax resist, whatever you draw or sketch, it's going to stay there for a little while. There's no real removing it unless you're sort of scratching away with your fingernail. Drywall tape. So the rolls of drywall tape give you this lovely sticky side. I just cut a couple pieces here. That you can use connected to your paper in any kind of a textural way. I think I'll just line those two up. And you can kind of take that tape and just paint right through it. Now it won't look like much at first. What you're gonna do is leave it to sit. And just let that paint dry with the tape down in place. And then when you pull it back up, you get this kind of really neat, it's not a harsh grid like you may think. You get this beautiful kind of mottled texture that's very abstract. So there you go, there is the drywall tape. I'm gonna let that just sit there as I continue through the list. So sponges. We've got these lovely sea sponges. They just have these natural nooks and crannies and a lovely texture to them. And you can use them to give some visual texture, maybe in the background of your portrait. Again, it usually always begins with a big flat wash of color, right? Or you could make it a bit of a graded wash, I don't know. Remember, these would be backgrounds or effects in the background. And then once that color's sitting there, but while it's still wet, you can come in and it's a bit like lifting out. You can see what that sponge does. And there is a bit of transfer too. So you can see if you want more of a dry sponge look, I'll just come out to the side. Or if you wanted to come into your palette, you can attempt to also paint with it. So there's a few different effects. Sometimes using that more directly kind of makes people happier when it comes to the sponge. And then just like you would for a brush, you want to take these sponges to the back sink or right away in your water container and really clean out all of that paint and allow it to dry for the next person. Good old masking tape can really be interesting if you just simply want to create some sort of a division, maybe some sort of a horizon line. Sometimes we need a really clean, I don't know, corner or edge. And so you just use it like any other tape would. You do want to use this yellow masking tape just because the watercolor tends to want to bleed or run through. And you kind of want to paint away from the tape as well if possible. So you can see how I'm trying to come in with that look. So there's your masking tape. It will give you good clean edges, or it could protect a portion of your portrait if you need. Again, just like the drywall tape, I'm going to allow my paint to dry before I pull the tape up at the end of this demo. Last two are really fun. So the salt is a nice coarse grain, just sea salt. And you really don't need very much, so be extra cautious as you dispense some into your hand. Like that is plenty for the sizes of areas I'm doing. If it was a large portrait, you could do a bit more. You'll need get a nice deep darker color here, sort of this gray blue. You can mix it up. But with the salt, the darker and wetter your paint is, the more obviously the salt can pull. So you definitely want a good amount of water involved, but also a really strong amount of pigment, okay? And this might not show straight away, but you're going to want to just sprinkle a few grains down wherever it's wet. And just like the tapes, the effect of the sea salt doesn't really show until it's dried. But each grain of salt is kind of acting like a mini sponge and sucking up the water or the texture. And it will leave these little white crystallized marks. I sort of have one here that's dried. Sometimes it goes lighter, sometimes they go darker. This side is the drywall tape that's dried. And then last but not least, the rubbing alcohol. So it's just in a little spray bottle like this. Very tough to find these days in the drugstore, but we do have a couple of bottles. It's gonna smell like the nurse's office when you use it. Warning, warning. I'm just gonna get a color happening here that I'm happy about. So again, I'm just kind of gonna go with a dark color. It makes it easier for you to appreciate it, but you could blend colors. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. Blend in a mix of colors in your background, okay? Into this more blue on this side. And again, while this is still wet, you're just going to take the spray bottle. You can experiment with how close or far away or how much. And as it sprays, that might actually be enough, to be honest, but I can do one more. And then it's just going to react with, again, the water, sort of like the wax reacts against it. It just wants to spatter, and then it gives you these lovely little pools. Now, a softer mist, this was a lot of rubbing alcohol, and it really pooled it. If you use it more softly, you kind of end up with this light misting. And so that might be preferable to you. So you can kind of experiment. Again, it depends on, just trying to get some more color here, on how you want the effect to look. It's not a perfect science. It's kind of a beautiful surprise every time. And then hopefully these have had long enough to dry. So carefully peel away any tapes that you might have used in the process. If you can let things dry overnight, that's actually ideal. But these are just experiments to give you a sense of textures. For the salt, you're just gonna take your hand and kind of brush it away. Pretty sure that that needed more time, but you can sort of see in these areas here where it's lifted up, and you can see on the salt that it's picked up the pigment too. Those are your special effect techniques. Good luck and have fun.